will not only cause steam pressure to drop, but there's great danger of making the flues leak, which is something you don't want to do. Now, something also to remember when you've got the fuel oil tank here, fuel oil expands. Heating the oil increases the volume and decreases the specific gravity and weight per gallon through the expansion of the oil. Decreasing the temperature decreases the volume of the oil and increases the gravity and weight per gallon. Oil changes about 1% in volume for every 25-degree rise in temperature. In other words, 1,000 gallons of oil at 60 degrees Fahrenheit. This will increase 10 gallons or to 1,010 gallons if raised to 85 degrees Fahrenheit. It'll increase to 1,020 gallons if the temperature is raised to 110 degrees Fahrenheit. So basically for every 25 degrees in temperature, the 1,000 gallons will change 10 gallons more in volume. On which the injectors work. The action of the injector is due first to the difference between kinetic or moving energy and static or standing energy. Second, the fact that steam at a pressure travels at a high velocity, and when placed in contact with a stream of water, it is condensed into water, and at the same time it imparts enough velocity to the water to give it sufficient momentum to overcome the pressure even greater than the original pressure of the steam. By imparting this velocity to the water, it gives it sufficient energy to throw open the check valves and enter the boiler against high pressure. The injector consists of a body supplied with the steam valve, steam nozzle, a primer, combining tube, delivery tube, line check valve, overflow valve, water valve, and the lifting injector has a lifting tube. Now, the lifting injector will create sufficient vacuum to raise the water from the level of the tank. Steam tubes on this injector can be placed above the level of the water tank. On a non-lifting injector, the injectors would have to be placed below the level of the tank so that the water flows to it by gravity. A lifting injector such as this won't work if there's a bad leak between the injector and the tank. It will not prime because the air admitted through the leak destroys the vacuum required to raise the water to the injector level. If an injector primes well, but breaks when the steam is turned on full, trouble is due to insufficient water supply, tank valve is partly closed, strainer stopped up, or tank hose kinked. The injector tubes are out of line. Method of operating the locomotive injector is as follows. First, you'd open up the bottom valve. Then you open the middle valve. Then you look out of the cab at the overflow pipe. When water appeared at the overflow, you'd open the top valve, which is your steam valve, and close the middle valve. Then you could watch the water glass and mirror, determine your water level. Once you had sufficient amount of water in the boiler, shut off the top valve and the bottom valve. Now, if you had to blow back the injector or apply the heater, on the top of the injector in front of the steam line is a valve. You close that down and then open the top valve here. Now, that top valve of the injector should never be closed except when the injector is to be used as a heater. Now that we've covered some of the basic parts of number 9, now we get into what we do if number 9 was in operating condition and you wanted to start and run the engine. The thing that you'd want to do is check the fuel oil level and the water level. Make sure that you have plenty of oil and water. Locomotive, and make sure that all the drain valves are open. Remove the stack cover, and then take your oil can oil the moving parts, put oil the boxes, the journals, take your grease gun and grease the fittings. Make sure all the moving parts of the locomotive were well oiled. Go up, oil the bell and the ringer. Aside from firing the locomotive, the fireman is also the engineer's eyes and ears on this side of the cab. Part of his duties includes keeping an eye out ahead, checking back along the train for signals or any problems that might arise, such as sticking brakes, hot journal boxes, etc. If you're going to be a brakeman, conductor, or locomotive engineer, there are certain signals that you need to be aware of and know what they mean. If the brakeman's standing out here on the caboose, and waving a flag to the side horizontally, means reduce speed. If he's doing it right angle across the tracks, low, like this, means stop. Now, if he's waving the flag violently, that's a more urgent sign to stop. Applied the brakes, waved above his head. Now, if you've got a green flag, just held above his head, means release air brakes. Waved up and down is proceed signal. Now sometimes they'll use a yellow flag for this next one. In a circular motion, that's a signal to back up. 60 feet in front of the locomotive, I've placed a red flag between the rails. Remember, red is a signal to stop. That red flag represents the point where the firemen and engineers' views converge. I'll explain a little bit better momentarily. This is the view from the fireman's side of the cab. Notice the red flag out in front here. And this is the same from the engineer side of the cab. You can see the flag. This gives you an idea. There's a wedge-shaped piece in front of the locomotive. Extends from the sides of the locomotive out to about where the flag is. That's a blind spot for both the engineer and the fireman. If the train's moving, you don't want to get that blind spot. Now, to emphasize that point, I'm going to tell you a true story that happened here in the Lodge Yards just before the turn of the century. There was a 10-year-old girl that had the bad habit of standing on the tracks as the train was coming and waiting till the last second to jump aside. Well, one day this girl did that, and unknown to her, her 18-month-old little sister had crawled out and followed behind her. And the girl was standing watching the train come. The little baby was right behind. When she jumped out of the way, the crew of the locomotive saw the little baby, put on the emergency brakes. Now, to give you an idea, speed limit in these yards at that time was only 10 miles an hour. Where the baby was, and by the time the crew was able to react and stop the train, the locomotive, tender, and 2 cars had run over the child, killing it instantly. That is why railroad tracks are not a place to play around. Locomotive being 60 feet away from you, where I was just standing, if you were on the track and they had to stop, you've got the 60 feet, then the locomotive and tenders another 56 feet, then you have another 60 feet of the 2 cars behind it. So it will take the locomotive and train approximately 180 feet to stop. Give the train the right-of-way. You can stop on a dime. They can't. Next to a switch, you've got the main line that curves off to the left. The spur goes to the turntable and oil pump house spur. Now you'll note the color indicator, red, for stop. In throwing the switch, you'd have a lock. You'd unlock the switch stand, lift up on the handle, make sure that your feet are planted properly, throw the switch, put the lever down. Most of the time it would be thrown to the main line. If you had the switch off and go down the spur, after you'd made your movement, you'd return the switch to its original position and lock it back in place. Now, at the very beginning, I mentioned about stepping over rail and not stepping on it. You'll notice between the rail and the points, you've got a gap. And if you step wrong, what happens, you can get your foot caught right in here. And if there's a train coming and your foot's caught, you're in trouble. That's why, again, step over the rail. This section of the switch is your guardrails And this is what's known as the frog. Notice you've got a gap in there. Again, while you step over the rail and not on these parts, say you're down, say I was down in this area here, and I decided to step not over these rails, but on them, and my foot slipped. It can get caught in between the rail and makes it very difficult to get uncaught. It's a very unsafe position to be in. Into the cab. Check and see how much water you have in the water glass. Now, what do you do if you don't have any water in the boiler and you don't have any steam pressure built up to operate the injectors and put water from the tank into the boiler? Steam dome is a pipe with a valve sticking up. This is where you can connect a steam line or compressed air to put enough pressure in the boiler where you could operate the injectors and the blower. What you'd want to do is get about 60 pounds of pressure in the boiler. You come in, open the fountain valve, open the steam throttle to your injectors, both sides of the back head. Go to the tender, open up the water valves, then you'd open the injector, bottom valve first, middle valve. You look out the cab window, you'd see steam coming from the overflow pipe. Then you'd open the top valve. Do the same on the fireman side. And let the boiler fill with water. Open the top valve of the water glass and the bottom fill valve. Now as water level rises and comes up, you'll watch the water glass. Once the water level reaches the minimum, let it fill up a little bit more, about another inch in the glass. Then you can shut down your injectors. Once they're shut down, check your gauge, make sure that you're still getting air from the house line or steam. Keep your pressure up at about 60 pounds. Then you're going to want to open the valve to the oil burner manifold. Open the tank heater valve. Open the tank heater valves on the tender. You'd want to make sure that the wheels of the locomotive are securely blocked. You'd then open the fire door Remove any carbon, fire brick, or other obstruction that would interfere with the flame from the burner, traveling from the burner to the opposite end of the firebox at the flash wall. Next, you'd open the damper. Open your blower valve, create a draft through the firebox. Check the temperature of your oil in tank with the back of the hand. If it's uncomfortable to the back of the hand, then your oil is getting too hot. You shut down the tank heater. You want to open the atomizer valve for a few seconds to blow out any condensation that may be in the burner. With the fire door open, you'd have your fire lighter, some waste soaked in oil, lit, stuck into the firebox. You go back, open the atomizer valve enough to carry the oil from the burner to the flame. Then you take the firing valve, open it gradually, just enough oil to create a mist which catches fire. Now, you want to avoid a heavy explosion when the oil ignites, using only enough oil to generate steam without making black smoke. It's important that the atomizer be opened first, then open the firing valve gradually. Now, once you've got a fire, and it's going, you can bring it up to the first notch here. This is where you'd want the firing valve to be until you've got nice warm boiler. Make an observation of the fire through the fire door. Make sure that the flow of oil and the fire is filling the whole firebox with flame, that it's not off to one side or the other or up and down. Adjust the atomizer and the firing valve so that the oil will be atomized and consumed as it passes from the burner. Careless adjustment may cause part of the flow of oil to drip down from the burner and be wasted, or by dropping into the pit may cause damage by fire or explosion. Remember to keep an eye on the water glass. Make sure that you have a sufficient amount of water. Check it with the use of the tricox. If you need to put water in the boiler, open up the injectors. Feed just as much water as you need as it's making steam. Once you're up to 120 pounds of pressure in the boiler, you can open the throttle for the turbo generator. Get that started up. Once the generator is started up, you can flip the switches on. Make sure all the lights are on and burning. For the headlight and backup light, have somebody stand in front of the locomotive. Turn the headlight on full. Check, see if it's okay, if it's burning properly. Switch it to dim, see if it's burning properly. Have them go to the back of the tender. Do the same with the backup light. Turn the light on full, see if it's burning properly. Turn it to dim, see if it's burning properly. Back to full and off. Before you put any pressure in the hydrostat lubricator, open the fill plug, check the oil level, make sure that it's full of oil, close the plug, make sure your drain's closed, open the steam valve to the lubricator, you can open up the water to it. Watch your sight feed glasses. Now, this first feed cock is to the air pump. You want to open it just a little bit so it'll feed about 2 drops of oil a minute down to the air pump. Go back here to the air pump throttle. Open the air pump gradually. Get the pump started slowly. So that way you've got a cushion of air and also to allow time for the lubrication to get down to the cylinder. Make sure that it's operating properly. Once the air pump's operating properly, you can open it up all the way. You should be at approximately 120 to 140 strokes of the air pump per minute. Now, something I forgot to mention earlier, which is very important, after you've got the injectors going, just before, you can shut the drain valve here on the injector on both sides. And after you've got the air pump going and the condensation blown out, shut down the drain cock and also go to your air tanks. Once the condensation's blown out, shut those so it'll start charging the tanks. Shut the cock at the back of the tanks so that way you'll build up pressure in the tanks and leave nothing in the lines for right now. Make sure that the brakes remain on. Remember to check your water glass from time to time. Make sure that there's plenty of water in the boiler. Stays above the crown sheet. Now, once the boiler starts making its own steam and the pressure starts rising, you can shut off the intake valve and disconnect the house line. Once the boiler pressure gets up to 180 pounds operating pressure, the 2 items on either side of the pipe are safety valves. One is set to go off at 180 pounds of pressure. The other one is set to go off at 182 pounds of boiler pressure. You want these valves to lift when you're first steaming up in the morning to make sure that they are operating properly. Under normal circumstances, you want these to lift as little as possible, as the popping of these valves wastes approximately 2 gallons of fuel oil a minute. Also remember to bear in mind that as your steam pressure goes higher, the higher the temperature required to cause the water in the boiler to boil. At 180 pounds steam pressure, water boils at 372.886 degrees. Open your sand box. Make sure that you've got sand for sanding flues in a scoop. Come out here. Make sure that you have 2 red flags, 2 green flags, 6 fuses or flares, and 12 torpedoes.